This is Dr. Judy Shaw with Shaw Medical Travel Consultants, and I'm happy to bring to you another interesting interview in regards to the aspects of interest to Shaw Medical Travel Consultants, which has to do with cultural awareness, cultural competence, travel, and medical missions, medical events in foreign countries. Today we have with us Maylene Leu-Bent, who is extensively traveled with a lot of experience with negotiations abroad. I'm going to read a little bit about Ms. Leu-Bent. Maylene holds a Bachelor's of Arts degree from the University of the West Indies and a Master of Science in International Business from the University of London. She's a human development consultant who brings over 19 years of experience in all aspects of strategic planning, program management, and policy advice in public health and other human development disciplines. Maylene has extensive knowledge and experience in the international health systems landscape and has worked to provide senior country-level regional organizational development and policy advice for the United Nations, academic institutions, and key international philanthropies. Ms. Leu-Bent experience features work in health policy development, organizational development, strategic planning, nationally, regionally, and organizational, program development, capacity building, and in-country experience in English, Dutch, French, and Spanish-speaking Caribbean, Latin American, as well as different areas in the United States and Africa. So I'm proud to have this conversation with Ms. Leu-Bent, and we're going to get started. How are you doing today?
Doing well. Thanks for having me.
All right. So let's get started. Let's start off with you just telling me a little bit about your experience in what you do, and in just a few sentences before we get into any great depth.
Sure, absolutely. So I've had the pleasure of serving in a number of capacities, both as policy advisor as well as program and project manager for a number of human development projects, as well as programs that have, longer duration as well as short duration to long duration. So human development, my expertise is mainly in public health. I'm originally from Trinidad and Tobago. So I've had the pleasure of working through the Pan-Caribbean region, but have been very fortunate to have worked on programs really across the board and have had the pleasure of learning myself about different aspects of cultural appropriation and different aspects of being present and being most effective while working cross-border.
Wonderful. So let me ask you some specific questions.
Sure.
How much of the challenges that you may face or you may encounter in your negotiations can you attribute to culture? To being, the nature of a cultural entity that may prevent appropriate negotiations?
Sure. I mean, I think, there's definitely a cultural context that could be a hindrance or a help in each instance, whether it be you're functioning as a consultant, you're functioning representing an organization, whatever your role or however you are pitched. I think definitely the cultural context, as I say, can hinder or facilitate negotiations or the role that you have to play. I think key to even answering that question is having the mindset of understanding that there's a cultural context that you're operating in. And I know that probably sounds very cliche and very obvious to many people, and especially those who are a bit more attuned in that sense. But you find, and I've seen many consultants have significant challenges by either underestimating or overestimating their ability to be able to operate in a particular cultural context. It certainly is a significant consideration, and one that those who, when, of course, normal travel patterns resume, those who have, you know, the ability to move in various locations that you really need to be mindful of. I think it's a significant chunk of the challenges that you might face. However, they are not easily, but it is relatively routine to take those considerations into play and then plan around them and for them.
What would you say if you had to pick a couple? What would you say would be the most difficult challenges that maybe you have encountered when doing business abroad in different countries, negotiating with different cultural entities?
I think there are a couple. I think one of the ones that I've found over the years, and particularly in a consultant capacity that is significant, is client expectation, or the expectation of your stakeholders, whoever you're going to meet, whoever you're supporting, or whoever you're negotiating with. And in that sense, it's really the client expectation of you and the role that you are playing, the purpose of your trip, for example. I mean, there's nothing like, you know, a stakeholder who expects you to deliver all the answers and get everything done, but that's not really your role, you know? So it's really best to clarify this in early negotiations and really reiterate wherever appropriate, whether through, you know, a job description or that type of thing, but really agree on that and agree on what you want to get out of every interface, every meeting, every in-person, sort of every Zoom call, that type of thing. Those things are really critical. So managing those expectations is also key. I think another one that does present a challenge is really individual bias and sort of perception. You know, you are, if you're in a support role, you are meeting possibly several people and you're negotiating, you are supporting, you know, possibly a small group of people and a small leadership group. And so each individual brings with them their different biases, their different perceptions of your role, as well as, you know, some may not be supportive at all of having someone coming in, especially coming in cross-country from another country to support. And so you have to be very, very mindful. You know, you cannot assume that everyone who you'll be interacting with will be supportive of even your consultancy. Not so much of a personal issue, more than just that everybody has bought in to your intervention. And I think that's something that's good to have in the back of your mind as well, to also plan around and to be a bit more tuned to picking up, because there are ways of working with those persons to actually get to your common outputs and your common goals. And that I wanted to highlight is sort of, you know, a bit of red tape, if I can use that phrase, you know, sort of the institutional, organizational, or even national level environment, regulatory or otherwise, that might make moving areas forward challenging or difficult. And it's important, one, to understand those, to understand what they are, to define them, to draw them out with your stakeholders or your clients or whoever you're working with, and then see how to address each one of those specifically. Because again, with folks who are working through those on a day-to-day basis, it may not be at the front of their minds. It may not be, you know, something that they realize until you have to push a process forward. And I think those three, you know, your client expectations, that sort of individual perception of bias, as well as the institutional kind of national processes and red tape, those are real things, and that, you know, you'd be best placed to keep them at the forefront of your planning, to plan around them, even in time planning when you're project managing as well, to be able to insert some room to manage those closely.
So that's interesting. So let me focus on the individuals at this point. So you mentioned biases. So we all come to negotiations with biases. We have biases. The individuals we're meeting, we're talking with, have biases. Do you find that there is some consistency with these biases? Do you find that there is significant variation with regards to what region, nationally, internationally, that you may go? Or is this sort of a new slate everywhere that you go?
I mean, if you think of, I mean, as much as we are digital, as much as, you know, we use that sort of interface, everything is really, whether it's over a screen or it's 6 feet away from you, everything is that interpersonal connection. Everything comes down to that. You know, all negotiations, all meetings, and that type of exchange. Even through an email, you know, we're managing interpersonal exchange. And with that, we get 120% of a person's, you know, their cultural dynamic, their biases, their life experiences. Sure, there are cultural patterns that affect, you know, how people interact and interface and that type of thing. But there are no, I wouldn't say there are patterns that affect a particular bias. I mean, something obviously as a woman, I think all of the well-known challenges that women face, particularly as a female consultant in some, you know, environments that is male dominated. When I have a room full of you know, of male leadership, I haven't faced, I guess, any sort of significant or overt bias in that way. But also I invest a lot of time, and this is regardless of, you know, this is just my approach to professionalism. This is my choice to have approached, you know, my preparation in a very comprehensive way. So apart from ensuring my competency in a particular subject area that I've been asked to look at, my preparation has to do with looking at the cultural dynamic. My preparation looks at, you know, things like just the environment, the work environment, where I'm heading, you know, what's the dress sense, what's dress code, and that type of thing. I think there's so many facets when we're talking about doing business, especially when you have to travel abroad to do so, that yes, there are biases, but there are also things that can be completely broken down by how, as a professional, you project yourself as well. So, and I'll give you an example. You know, an individual who would be not supportive from somebody coming externally to, you know, to assist them with items A, B, and C, or, you know, managing a grant, for example, would be put at ease by one, somebody who's prepared, somebody who is knowledgeable about, has done their research about the organization, somebody who comes in, and if there's a culture of formal dress, is reflecting the same and doesn't come in with a floral palm printed shirt because they're coming to the Caribbean, for example, or they're going to East Africa. You know, so all of that, all of those components, I think, have to do, for me at least, more with presenting yourself as a competent professional, present myself with the best, you know, competency possible.
Right. So then you're saying that there are some personal adjustments that you may need to do, educate yourself about your environment, any other types of personal adjustments that you might have to do in order to prepare yourself to get into these circumstances and these negotiating on these negotiating tables.
Oh, without a doubt, without a doubt. I think particularly, I mean, regardless of whether you have a team with you, whether you're speaking on behalf solo of an organization or yourself as a consultant, I think what you project is just a direct reflection of your personal preparation as well. There are a number of things that are absolutely necessary, particularly in negotiations, you sort of cross borders and cross cultural. One is the humility to listen and the humility, you know, really to learn as well. In every environment that you go, there's the potential for you to learn something, whether it is something cultural, whether it is something with respect to the technical areas of whatever you're working with, whether it is something about that organization, you always have the potential to learn. And I think really dialing it down, you could be, you know, a 30-year expert on whatever your area of specialization is. You really have to make a personal investment in having that sense of humility, as well as developing the skill to listen to your clients, to your stakeholders, even in the most contentious negotiations. You know, I think there's always something you can pick up on that might be a sore point, that might be an issue that is really of burning importance to an individual or an organization, that you can address, that you can look at. Another skill that I feel is critical is really validation of what what you've heard. If you're truly listening, whether it be, at the end of a meeting, whether it be near the end of a week, if you're there for several days or several months, I think the constant validation. So what you're saying is, and what I'm hearing is this correct? Underscoring all of that is the humility to be able to really take note physically as well as mentally and repeat that back, because I think that goes a long way in folks really connecting with you and feeling that they've been heard and feeling that you've taken the time and investment to hear, what you're saying. I mean, none of this is unusual to any type of interpersonal relationship or negotiations, but it's just that there are things that we overlook so significantly, when we're operating in different environments, especially when you're in your zone, you're in your area of expertise, you're working, you think, there's so much experience that you're gathering, and so you go out, but how that's projected is really critical. So I think the humility is significant. I think if you're not a natural listener, you just need to become one, quite frankly, because there's nothing to substitute for that. You do not want to be what I call a prescriptive poobah. I'm sure we've all had the experience of people who come in and they're experts in their field, terribly knowledgeable, but they come in with a preset prescription, regardless of environment, regardless of situation, and they know everything.
The same presentation, no matter where you go.
Absolutely, and it's nothing as off-putting as that type of scenario. The other thing, and I think this is something, there's a lot of self-reflection that facilitates this, is really a vested interest in the outcome for your stakeholders. Now, obviously, it would be difficult for people to engage with you, to have any sort of trust in your competence if you are not invested as they are in what the outcome is for them. And that is just so critical that you can't, there's no way to fake that, and because of that, you also have to develop a keen sense of flexibility, as well as, yes, apart from the outputs that we have listing in the job description, if situations change, sometimes you sit and you say, okay, I know we need to get to here, and this is in our way, let's see how we can work around, what do you think of this, that type of thing. It's that type of flexibility that I believe is important. And so it's that type of thing that develops that relationship with your stakeholders and your clients, where, this is what we want to get to. We want the leadership buy-in. We want this to be a goal. And so there's a confidence and there's a trust built there that you really can't, it just pays off in spades for all parties involved.
Right. So, so a lot of some of the things that you've said are what we would normally do in any sort of negotiation. However, you've also taken it to another level that I believe, because of the various maybe cultural and some situations, maybe even language barriers, this kind of thing, you have to be specifically more humble, more amenable to listening and flexibility, because there comes a different perspective than what we've always been taught, of that cultural difference, which sometimes you may be accustomed to approaching things a certain way in your normal circle of reference, that you don't necessarily have to explain and you don't necessarily have to break down when you're in a completely different environment, when the way people express themselves, the way people talk is completely different. And so your approach sometimes has to be adjusted. Is that what you're sort of getting? That's what you're saying?
Yes, I think so. There's no way I think that an individual is, particularly if you're traveling extensively and you're working across multiple cultures, there, over time you gain appreciation of those various conditions and where Europeans may communicate and operate, where folks from Latin America, I know Westerners, that type of thing. yes, you gain that experience over time, but I think the surefire way of really being relevant yourself and being most competent is really focusing a lot on your individual humility, keeping an open mind, um, being as clear as possible, and using some of those strategies around listening, around validation, around, and around preparation.
Right.
An example was, and I mean, this is more of an obvious example, but I was working for an organization at one point, and I was going to conduct a site review of a grant that was being given um, to this sub-organization, to an NGO. And it was a mosque, and they were doing support to the Muslim community. And so, there's this dynamic of the donor versus the grant recipient type of thing that can always be a little bit imposing, particularly if you're going to do a site visit. It's like the quintessential inspectors coming to inspect to see what we're doing. And I didn't want to create that environment because, quite frankly, I've never believed in that. A lot of people use that control and they use that power to be, to their advantage,
Yeah.
which means that a grant recipient they're a little bit nervous and that kind of thing. And, they may not open up about what their challenges are and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But in this situation, this was obviously a different cultural environment. It was actually a mosque. And so it was natural for me to take, for example, a head covering and that type of thing. And before I got in, I actually called to ask to just confirm which entrance I needed to come through, or whether they needed to come out and get me, because of course I didn't want to do anything. Culture. Absolutely needed to appreciate the culture because of, the difference between, the entrances for women and for men and that type of thing.
Right.
And you don't want to make that faux pas. And I think just in asking those two questions, my contact came out, I was wearing a head covering, that kind of thing, just out of respect for, the building that I was going into.
And I'm sure it builds much more to the relationship when they realize that you're actually making an effort. You may be successful, you may not be, but that you're making an effort.
Absolutely. And I mean, the direct feedback that came back, I mean, even before I returned to the office, was we were shocked. We were shocked that someone could be so, could be so thoughtful and deliberate in their efforts. We were shocked that this was a donor who was coming to us and that was having this meeting and who was brainstorming with us about how to get around some of our challenges. We were shocked at this type of relationship, and they really felt it was more of a partnership rather than, that type of thing. Just you may not have an immediate sort of benefit that comes to you as an individual and as
well, it builds the relationship though.
Absolutely, that relationship building is key.
Yes.
And so that comes out of being prepared. That comes out of, just your personal attitude. That comes out of investing in humility as a professional, which I think all of us, working in a particular field for X number of years, that is often, we take for granted. So
a few pointers that I've heard here is humility, being receptive to the cultural environment that you're going through, whether or not you agree with it or like it or whatever your personal biases are. You're saying put those aside and appreciate the environment that you're going into, and that being flexible.
Yes.
Thing. And being accommodating. Is that what you would say would be the key factors here?
I would stress a couple of things as well. Obviously, we talked about it much earlier, is the clarity of scope as a means of sort of managing expectations and making sure those are consistent and those are clear with what you expect as well is your role.
And that's specifically because, I mean, normally you would do that, but specifically because inherent in the cultural differences and the interpretation and understanding.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. The other one, which we overlook, which many of us who, travel extensively and that type of thing tend to overlook because we're always going, you go from, you're used to packing a bag quickly, you go where you're going, but just logistical preparation. And how that, I mean, I can't tell you how many times, you know, I've been on the other side as a client, and you have a consultant coming in, and they're where, you know, it's a formal environment, you're wearing a business suit every day, and they come in, and because it's a European or a northern based, you know, you're in the Caribbean or whatever, you come in and they're casually dressed because they know it's hot. Now, okay, that might be a personal comfort issue. However, there are ways to present yourself, you know, that are still formal but are appropriate to, you know, the climate. And that type of, those sorts of nuances. So the preparation for travel logistics.
In a few minutes that we have left, I'm sure there are some pitfalls, some things that you want to avoid. Now, you said many things to do, so I imagine not doing those things would be pitfalls, but specifically, can you name one or two in the few minutes remaining, just taboo, don't do, you know, and sometimes we try to be culturally appropriate, we try our best to wear the right garments, but sometimes it's just not right. And sometimes that too can be off-putting or a little bit offensive. So despite our good intentions, we don't get it right.
Right. I think very much I mean, there are 4 quick things. And again, as you say, it underscores the things to do. This is the other side of the coin. So it's really having the right personal attitude. You know, what you want to avoid is, you know, being the grand poobah and being the prescriptive individual. Right. You really, that's a definite pitfall. Nobody wants to work with somebody who feels you can fit into a mold and that they know everything. So not flexing, not being, being inflexible, not listening, that type of thing is definitely, not being willing to work through some of the red tape as well is definitely something that's gonna undermine your efforts. The other is, of course, preparation, a lack of it. That's a definite pitfall, be it in the technical issue that you're working at or being with just logistics, you know, your travel logistics, your preparation, personal preparation. Third being a lack of flexibility, that is a definite pitfall. And the fourth being just not investing in the clarity of scope and the clarity of the expectations, I think, and being able to reiterate that, I think, is key. So those are the 4, I think, key areas that you want to avoid.
Absolutely. That's excellent. You know, I think this would be so helpful, especially nowadays with the significant travel, significant negotiations, across seas, across borders, and now on Zoom or other kinds of technological escapes that we have, and we can't be in person to person, and therefore we do have to be flexible and adjusting. So this has been very helpful. And so I want to thank you for taking the time. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Dr. Shaw with Shaw Medical Travel Consultants, and this is Maylene Leu-Bent. We will provide some information where you may be able to contact her for her services, and appreciate the opportunity for the interview.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.